Now, when we usually talk about IEMs, one very specific thing that everybody within the audiophile scene will probably associate this word with is, that earphone that has an over the ear design. But, for certain brands, they still do the traditional piston buds route. So this is one of the IEMs that we're going to talk about today. This is made by Intime, and this is not the Miyabi model, which, everybody knows at this point. This is the Intime SHO DD, which honestly I haven't seen a lot of people talking about it. So, we're going to talk about it. So, huge thanks to Edmund for actually sending these pair my way so that I could give you guys an honest review on this pair of Intime. Less people reviewed this, maybe because it's a little bit of a sleeper, which in my opinion it's really a sleeper, which we'll talk about in the sound quality part. And this is the box that it comes with. Thank you again to Edmund for actually separately sending this box my way, so at least we could get to see how it was being packaged in. Like, it's really just a very simple box with nothing much going on. Once you open it, you are literally just being greeted with it inside its foam. I'll be honest, I have no goddamn clue how to read Japanese, so it is what it is. In general, this thing is made of a duralumin and a resin type of build, which is basically aluminum resin, and also it has a 10mm DD as well as a ceramic tweeter. And this thing has Pentacon MMCX terminations, which honestly makes things a little bit problematic, considering that if you want to cable roll, you need to buy a separate converter. But the good thing about a Pentacon termination is that this thing comes in a stock Pentacon cable, which I will feel like that's quite a W. So there's that. And this thing is as simple as it looks. Let's just directly jump into the sound. So the source that I use is gonna be just an M15 at this point. I only use the M15 basically because if I'm using my Kensei, a very specific problem comes to play. Because this thing is too powerful, because the Kensei is too powerful, it might actually color the Miyabi a little bit too much. So I might have a little bit more bias towards this product. But I'm using the M15, so everything would be slightly better considering that it is literally around its price point. So in general, after listening to this for around 2 to 3 weeks, it has a very specific, I wouldn't say cliche, but it has a very nice V-shaped sound to it with, quite warm entities. And let's just basically start off with the bass, because that's probably the most interesting part that I would want to say about it. Bass in general, when we're talking about bass, usually I like to use words like thumpy, I like to use words like punchy. One very certain thing that separates this among all of the other IEMs that I've tested is that this thing has a form of diffused bass. Like, diffused bass is very specific when you're listening to like hi-fi equipment. Like, when you're listening to something that's punchy, you could feel like that thing is literally coming at you, but at the same time there might be another principle saying that that thing has bass that's very congested and it's just trying to aim at one specific point. This type of diffused bass just basically like makes you feel like it's filling up the whole room. It still has punchiness, but you can feel like after that punch everything just diffuses, which makes this thing quite immersive in the bass region. Sub bass is hefty and plentiful and presented in a more rounded and loose presentation due to the fact of this diffused nature. And lower and mid bass definitely sounds groovy with a good amount of lift to them. But if I were to nitpick, this is what I wrote. In very certain cases, the bass for some reason might sound a little bit nasally in terms of the positioning. Like everything is just sitting in front of your nose bone, like in front of your nasal cavity, which is very specific to say, but that's what I heard. But other than that, everything is quite good. And in terms of the note definition, due to the fact that this is a quite, I would say, a more bassy set, it's a quite bassy V-shaped set, note definition would be around average for what this price point delivers. And moving on to the mids, let's talk about the vocals first. Vocals, I would say, due to the fact that, they made the Miyabi, I wouldn't say this thing is quite far off from it. The vocals are very nice and quite okay for a V-shape. It is not recessed in any point or any form, and it has enough maturity, but might sound slightly Japanese tuning for veterans. Even though, like I say, this thing overall has quite a warmness to it, this is probably more aiding to the fact that it has that diffuse bass, making everything sound quite warm. But if you are listening to something that is mainly mixed to emphasize the vocalist, then it might sound neutral. The tonality of the vocals might sound more neutral, or maybe even slightly cold for male and female vocalists. And one very nice thing about the Intime SHO DD is that there is little to no sibilance for both male and female, which I really appreciate. And like I said just now, even though I could say that the vocals are quite forward, the mids might have some slight recess to it, but it's not really that big of a deal. Like overall, everything has a light timbre, and like I say, it has a slightly recessed positioning to it. But overall, you know, things take a backseat, and it might be a little bit less immersive if your whole track is more mid-heavy. And when I say something like mid-heavy, think of something like orchestra. Think of something like, I would say, J-pop, Hochimachi Suisei stuff. The more busy the track is, ironically, the less immersive this thing might get. The more simple the track is, which, you know, mainly aided by the bass, mainly aided by the lower region, everything will sound more immersive. But still, instruments overall are quite luscious, are quite smooth, are quite tactile, and in terms of the overtones, all of the overtones are quite apparent, and it has a slight airiness to everything. Two specific things that I would like to note about this: anything that is string related has quite a more natural timbre to it, and quite nice micro detail emphasis, which is a plus. And the second nitpick is something that I will feel like is a little bit of a downfall, but not really that big. Like again, this is already nitpick levels. The synths that are being recreated by the Intime SHO DD might sound a little bit flat. It might sound less invoking of emotions, if it makes any sense. But regardless of what I say, this thing I would say is still quite solid for its bass and its mids. The bass is already quite a lot, and you know, the mids could still push out this much level of presentation. Now moving on to the upper mids and treble, airiness are still extended towards the upper mids and treble. Drums are quite good in terms of energy, the extensions, and there's no sense of peakiness or fatigueness to it, so everything's quite good. And there's no metallic tones on it. Everything, again, like I say, it's just quite natural. And details on the upper mids are presented in a very spacious way with, again, very good diffusion, very good overtone diffusion. The word diffusion, I would say, is probably the best way to describe how this pair just, you know, emphasizes everything. It doesn't make everything feel like it's congested into a place. It just feels like it's just being released into the room, like it's within the atmosphere, if it makes any sense. And this is one very specific thing that I've noticed, which is more related to its technicalities. Now, there might be some slight timbre roll-offs from trumpets, which, you know, I feel like it's quite amazing. Like, it adds that little bit of a zing when you're listening to something that's brass related. If you're listening to horns, trumpets, everything sounds very, I would say, live. Now, in terms of technicalities, dynamics are quite good. I don't really find any problems regarding this. Everything is quite well balanced, but still, on quite high volumes, I would feel like the bass might be a little bit too much, and it might slightly, just slightly, recess the mids a little bit further. That's about it. Soundstage, for the price point, for around $300 maximum, it is quite above average for what it's able to deliver. It has enough depth, it has enough width. Height is, I would say, average, but I don't really blame it. If you have enough width, everything will sound quite immersive already. And again, imaging is very well executed for what it's worth. And let's talk about the detail retrievals, which is the more interesting part. Now, detail retrieval on this pair for $200 plus to $300, this thing is quite a strong contender in its own right. I will highlight one thing. Detail retrieval is one thing, but the ability to emphasize overtones is another thing. The reason that I keep mentioning diffused stuff just now, I keep mentioning the word diffuse, the overtones are being emphasized and it is being diffused around you. This whole thing, this whole feature that Intime has made really makes this pair separate from the rest in terms of how it makes you feel like things are immersive. If anything, I would say that this thing has a little bit more relevance and a little bit more similarities to like hi-fi units. What I'm saying is that this thing basically has a better type of detail recreation and detail retrieval and emphasizing all of those nuances throughout the tracks. And this is one of the more ironic things that I would want to say. I mentioned that the bass is being diffused, right? So if you're listening to bass heavy tracks, you know, sometimes we do not like stuff like those because it could drown the mids, but ironically in this case, I really enjoy bass heavy tracks on this pair. Mainly because even though I usually like neutral tuning, this thing is actually quite fun of a pair because it emphasizes the bass quite well and just diffuses everything, so it does not sound quite congested. Like, thumpiness is one thing, it might sound quite fatiguing after a while. This thing does not have that level of fatigueness. It has literally no fatigueness after me listening to it for an hour or two in very specific bass heavy hip hop tracks with all those 808s smacking in your face. Everything just sounds quite strong. Everything still has the thumpiness, but it is being diffused quite well, so everything just balances out each other. It won't sound fatigued at all. So with all that being said, my final thoughts about this is that, like I say, this thing is a quite interesting pair for a V-shape, and I might even say that this is a little bit more of a niche V-shape IEM, but it's definitely a specific pair that I quite enjoy and I will remember once I send it back to Edmund. Is this worth it for $300 US? I would say for the tuning, just the tuning itself, it's already quite worth it. But definitely this thing is quite an old pair. You could probably get it for cheaper in secondhand market, so try your luck. I would say overall, if you enjoy hip-hop music, you could try this. Like, this thing is quite fun in itself. No definitions of the bass might not be the best, but for $300 or within 1,000 ringgit in Malaysia, I would say go for it. So with all that being said, thank you for watching. Sorry for this weird makeshift A-roll again, but you know, it is what it is. I'll see you guys in the next video. Take care.